All right, I want to talk to you about this recent case I read about that you were involved in. Just reading it, it sounded like just a really tragic situation, but also just a crazy fact pattern.
Yeah, so little boy had just turned 3 years old, and he goes down to a resort in Myrtle Beach called the Caribbean Resort and Villas. Big resort, big place, part of a large hotel group called Britain Resorts that actually, turns out, if you trace it, goes all the way up to a group called EOS Investors on Madison Avenue, kind of a classic follow the money.
Oh, yeah.
He's in this lazy river hour after hour. He loves the lazy river because he can't swim like the bigger kids can, so he's just got his little floaties on. And they get him home, and that evening he develops some redness on his inner thigh and around his pubic area along his waistband. The reason he's crying out in pain is because the chemicals are literally eating through his flesh.
All right. So we have with us today Kenny Berger from Columbia, South Carolina, on this edition of Brain Case Live. And Kenny and I we've met several times over the phone and maybe a Zoom call or something, but he lives in one of my favorite towns, which is Columbia, South Carolina, which is where I've already had one go through school, and I probably am going to have another one. So, Kenny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a lawyer just as I am up here in Richmond, and you kind of do the same sort of thing. So why don't you just introduce the audience to your practice and how you got into this?
Yeah. And again, thank you for having me. So I've got a 5-lawyer firm here in Columbia, and we also have an office down in Myrtle Beach. And South Carolina is a small state, about 5 million people in the whole state. So it's a statewide practice. We don't do a lot of volume, cap our number of cases pretty small, with a focus on life-changing injury and wrongful death cases. And within that, the niche that we work to develop within the plaintiff's bar, a lot of it revolved around traumatic brain injury and other types of catastrophic losses. But typically there was a brain injury component.
So you and I are alike in that regard. And people always ask me, well, how did you get into the, brain injury cases? Why are you focused on that? And I'm sure you've got your own unique story. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I think this is a pretty darn interesting story. Go back to November of 2012. And it's November 2012 when I'm out in Las Vegas at a deposition seminar. And when I'm at Vegas and at this deposition seminar, we take a lunch break. And there were a couple guys in front of me from South Carolina named David Yarborough and William Applegate, who were tremendous lawyers, have become dear friends of mine. And they're in front of me in line, and we actually hadn't met until then. They practiced down in Charleston. And they said, hey, you want to have lunch with us? I said, sure. So the three of us sit down along with a lawyer from California. And I've been practicing at that point 3 years or something. And David and William and the attorney from California start talking about brain injury cases. And they're talking about a brain injury case where a young fella gets in a really bad wreck and he just wasn't the same and had issues with memory, had issues with relationships, behavioral changes, anger, outbursts. And as they're talking, I'm listening, and it starts sounding a heck of a lot like a case a buddy of mine down in Aiken, South Carolina had told me about. And so lunch ends, I go out into the hallway of this at the Bellagio, and I go out into the hallway and I call my buddy and I said, hey, that wreck case you had with Dustin, have you settled that case yet? And he was, nah, they're stuck at $50,000. I really want them to pay 60. I said, how much coverage is there? He said, $500,000. I said,
oh boy,
settle the case. It's a policy limits case. Whatever you do, don't settle. He was like, well, how do you figure? And I said, I'm pretty darn certain Dustin has a brain injury. I'll tell you all about it when I get back to South Carolina. Hang up the phone, go through the rest of the day at the deposition seminar, and start downloading as much information as I could back in the hotel room. Instead of going out and playing cards or whatever else, I just started reading as much as I can on brain injury and brain injury litigation plane ride home, I'm reading about brain injury litigation. And so by the time I got back, I was equipped enough to at least have a intelligent conversation. My buddy says, "Yeah, I mean, if you want, meet him and see what you think." I go, I meet him. It's a textbook presentation of a frontal lobe injury. We sign up the case, and did real well on it, and got that fella a lot closer to full justice than anything that he was looking at before our involvement. And that was back again in 2012. So the case went on through 2013, and that was the first one. And since then, I've had the opportunity to handle some really important cases for some really wonderful people.
But how do most of your clients find you? Is it through another lawyer, or do they just find you from marketing that you're doing to the community at large? How is it that they find you most of the time?
Yeah, most of our brain injury cases come from other attorneys.
Right, right.
A
That's
few
how mine
come.
is too. So here's an issue that always comes up, at least in my mind, is how do I talk to other lawyers to let them know what I can do for them to help them maximize the value of these cases for their clients. Because lawyers we're a self-confident bunch. I mean, everybody, if you've got a little bit of an ego or something, and you've got a case, your first instinct is, well, I can handle this. I got it. So how do you deal with that? Trying to get cases from other lawyers in South Carolina.
Yeah, I'd say typically the lawyers who think that way and lead with their ego and their own interest are primary over the clients, we're not going to get cases from those lawyers, right? At least not unless they've worked themselves into a real corner with a fast approaching trial date and an underprepared case.
Right.
And fear overrides ego. More typically, it's a lawyer who says, "Hey, I think it would be in the client's best interest to work with somebody." But a lot of times the challenge is either, the brain injury is so bad, they think, well, yeah, I don't necessarily need to work on this case with anybody else. The injury speaks for itself. Or they're not aware of the fact that the brain injury exists. Or maybe there's a third category of, I think this person had a brain injury, so I'm going to send them for neuropsych testing. The neuropsych testing says they have some mild areas of impairment, so I'm going to try to leverage that into some type of settlement that accounts for these mild areas of impairment on neuropsychological testing. And unfortunately, as you know, and probably a lot of the folks who are listening know, brain damage extends way beyond the obvious. Brain injury extends way beyond what the physical scans may show, and it certainly extends far, 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 far beyond any type of neuropsychological testing, which, to be completely transparent, I'm not a fan of, and I try to avoid when possible. But I think at the end of the day, lawyers who are listening to their clients, really, really good lawyers who are paying attention to what's going on with their client, who are getting to know their clients and know enough about medicine, be it brain injury or otherwise, to notice that something's wrong and that something wrong didn't exist before whatever harm was inflicted on them. Know to at least pick up the phone, and it might not be associating on the case, right? It might simply be, hey, do you have some thoughts on neuroradiological testing? Do you have thoughts on specific experts? Do you have thoughts on what to do with this issue or this medical record that says nothing's wrong with my client? And I have far more conversations, probably like you do, Kevin, with lawyers where there's not an association involved as much as there's a little bit of education, a little bit of information sharing. And in the event that down the road, there's a different case that perhaps we can add some value and make sense for us to work on together, that we've established our credibility.
Right. And that's a very common type of scenario with me as well. And I wholeheartedly agree with there's certain attorneys who are just never going to send you something for whatever reason. But then there are others who are thinking bigger picture. Okay, this is something that's real, or I suspect there's something real here. A team effort's going to bring in the best result for the client. And I love working with those attorneys. That's most of what I'm doing, and probably most of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to bring justice to those people. And you mentioned maybe they don't realize they've got a brain injury case. We see that, as you know, with medical professionals who I'm sure you've had a case or two where you get the case in. There are some other injuries maybe that were more acutely aware or obvious to the medical field. And the concussion that's still lingering kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Maybe it wasn't even diagnosed. So we see that a lot, not to mention even more hidden injuries like pituitary dysfunction following a brain injury. That talk about something that really can get lost unless you've got a neuroendocrinologist taking a look at these cases. And that's a very important part of the story if you have one of those cases. So I agree wholeheartedly with everything you just said. Have you had any cases involving pituitary dysfunction, and what do those cases look like?
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring that up. And this isn't something that we planned before the podcast started,
Okay,
right?
you're right. We didn't.
But we have. So we've had some folks who've treated with Dr. Benson, who used to be in Michigan, is now in Florida. And I'd seen Dr. Benson, Randall Benson, present on pituitary dysfunction in the setting of brain injury. And there was a doctor up in Michigan named Dr. Alza Haley, who we've worked with on several cases. And the beauty of those cases is there's objective testing that can be done to determine whether or not there is a decrease or insufficiency in the human growth hormone, in the function of the pituitary gland, what's known as hypothalamic pituitary dysfunction that's typically associated with head trauma and brain damage. And what's even more important is that once they get on human growth hormone or other medications, they respond positively. Their lives get better. They're less fatigued. They're less apathetic. Their memory and mood begins to improve, and those medications are available at times through waiver programs. So even though the medication itself may cost upwards of $80,000 a year, and something that in most states, South Carolina included, you can put in a life care plan, your client is actually getting for little to no cost. So
Right. Yeah.
their lives are improving. You've got objective testing that helps establish the injury, and you've got an $80,000 a year item in your life care plan. So you may have a case that there's several $1 million in coverage, and the defense is grossly undervaluing it and asking about, kind of typical brain injury stuff. You don't have much in the way of past medicals. Well, no, but we've got a damaged brain, and that's worth tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
That audience, right? That audience typically needs to see some type of number on a blackboard, even if you don't intend to present it at trial on the economic side. But here at $80,000 a year, if you've got someone life expectancy of another 40 years, I think that's 3.2. I don't know what it is reduced to present value. But it's a really big loss. So yeah, these pituitary cases, and Kevin, you may know someone who's closer to Virginia and the Carolinas who's doing this type of neuroendocrine testing, but it's a game changer. And it most importantly has improved our clients' lives.
Yes. And it's just one of those things, one of those nuances about these brain injury cases that you have to kind of build into your systems. And I talk a lot in my practice about systems, and we actually have a name for it here. It's called the brain injury litigation system, where we, if you retain us or work with us, we share with you, and we build these cases from the ground up. One of the checks on the checklist has to do with pituitary dysfunction, and just making sure that has been looked into. This is one area that your typical brain injury client will go to a doctor. Maybe they're diagnosed with a mild TBI. Maybe they've had some occupational speech therapy, what have you, related to that. Maybe they've been treating for over a year, but all of a sudden they're having other issues that are just not going away. The pituitary stuff gets lost even by the practitioners who are treating these folks. And through the good work of some brain injury medicine specialists, they've started to do a really good job of flagging that as a possibility, something to rule out. So very important, and it just highlights how these are special cases. They really are. And you're doing a great job on them in South Carolina. I wanted to ask you. So I've spent so much time in Columbia. I'll get your ideas on some good restaurants later.
Please do.
I've got my favorite ones.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the best food in Colombia is anywhere other than my wife's kitchen.
Oh, is that right?
She's a great cook. Next time you're in town, come over for dinner, man.
I would love
You
to.
got a little baby, so you might have to put up with some screaming in the
How
background.
how old is your little one?
9 months.
9 months old. Little girl, right? Okay.
Little girl. Yeah.
And so anywhere other than your than your wife's kitchen.
There's a great place called Terra. There's a really good Mexican restaurant called Koa.
Okay.
Man, Hall's Steakhouse makes
Hall's Steakhouse.
Hall's is a good
Oh,
experience.
Hall's. Oh, Hall's Chop House. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I've spent many times there.
Yeah. Home Team Barbecue does a good job.
But when I'm driving into Columbia, I see, and it's the same thing around Richmond. I see billboard after billboard after billboard, lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. And I'm thinking, well, Kenny's, and the same thing here in Richmond, and we drive around and my family's like, Dad, maybe you need a billboard, but I don't have any do you have any billboards? I don't have billboards.
I don't.
I've never seen a billboard, but you're doing fantastic. So just real quick, what's your secret? What's your strategy for getting the great cases you get?
Uh, Great question. So I think it starts with relationships,
Hmm.
and I think results are a huge part, and I think reputation is a huge part. So that's something that we talk about a lot is relationships, results, and reputation. That extends to lawyers and to non-lawyers. The only type of real advertising or marketing we do would simply be through the internet, and even there, it's just on organic search. We've put a ton of time over the last 11, 12 years, or heck, maybe more, that we've had a website with Foster Web Marketing, I think same
Right, right.
EU. So we do a ton of work on our website, creating really good content, doing all the best practice approaches when it comes to the website. But other than that, we do some newsletters, we do some email blasts, and we focus a lot just on marketing to people who already know us and
Right.
like us, be it other attorneys or non-attorneys. And that's really been our approach. But because we also have decided, look, we're not the law firm for every case, and every case certainly is not for our law firm. But if we come across someone who's a nice person, who has a case, but it's just not something that we'd handle right now, we tell them, look, for your case, the best way we can help you is. But if you have something in the future that requires our services, we'd be honored to work with you. Is it okay if we send you some free information and stay in touch? And 99 times out of 100, they say yes. Those people enter our database, right? And they get our newsletter and they get our emails, and we try to touch those people about once a month. And the vast majority of them, as you know, we never hear from, never send us a case, never have a case, but it's very, very inexpensive. And there are plenty of people that we market to over the years that do eventually refer us something. Again, lawyer or non-lawyer. And if we can just have the right cases that we want and work them up, again, the results take care of themselves, the reputation takes care of itself, and the relationships kind of grow beyond it. So that's
Right.
that's our overall approach.
All right. I want to talk to you about this recent case I read about that you were involved in, involving an injury to a child over in Myrtle Beach, which is a place as a child that I spent a lot of time. And would you just kind of tell us, just reading it, it sounded like just a a really tragic situation, but also just a crazy fact pattern.
Crazy fact pattern. Yeah. So little boy had just turned 3 years old, and he goes down to a resort in Myrtle Beach called the Caribbean Resort and Villas. Big resort, big place, part of a
Right.
large hotel group called Britain Resorts that actually turns out, if you trace it, goes all the way up to a group called EOS Investors on Madison Avenue, kind of a classic follow the money
Oh yeah.
case. But little boy's down there with his family. This is back in May of 2020, Memorial Day weekend. And little boy's name's Ashton Douglas. Had just turned 3, and he's in this lazy river hour after hour. And he loves the lazy river because he can't swim like the bigger kids can. So he's just got his little floaties on, and hour after hour he's around the lazy river, and he's getting out to eat pizza. He's getting out to play some, but mainly he's just in this lazy river. On the way home that afternoon, Kevin, Ashton starts fussing. That's not like Ashton. He's a tough kid. He's a little wild man. And
Right.
him fussing and crying is just not like him. They get him home, and that evening he develops some redness on his inner thigh and around his pubic area along his waistband. And throughout the night it gets worse and worse. And his pains get worse, and he's starting to cry out in pain. And the reason he's crying out in pain is because the chemicals are literally eating through his flesh. And those
Oh,
chemicals were illegally high, dangerous levels of chlorine. The way
wow.
we're able to uncover that is when Ashton's family ends up getting sent to the UNC burn center a couple days after he's been in the pool. UNC diagnoses chemical burn. They try to figure out, what could have caused this. They find out he'd been in the pool. Ultimately, South Carolina's Department of Health and Environmental Control goes and tests the pools at this resort. And Kevin, when they test the pools at this resort, the chlorine levels in this lazy river are quite literally off the charts.
Wow.
The resort says, well, that might have been on May 27th, but the chlorine levels on May 27th don't have anything in the world to do with what those chlorine levels were on May 25th. Here are our pool chemical logs. And look, they show the chlorine levels were perfect on May 24th and May 25th when Ashton was in the pool. And Kevin, as I'm looking at these records, I see it's the same initial 6 days in a row. I think, man, 6 days in a row, I wonder if that guy worked all 6 days.
Right.
So we sent off a discovery request for the timesheets of these employees, including this particular employee who was signing off on everything. And you look, and it says he worked on May 24th and May 25th, but then when you look at how much he got paid for those days, he didn't get paid anything. So it's like, well, hold on now. Maybe he was scheduled to work those days, and he either didn't work those days and came back in and falsified the records later, or he just volunteered to go in on those days out of the goodness of his heart. And we had a feeling it was probably the former, not the latter. So we
Right.
get him on a videotape deposition, and about 3 hours into the deposition, I basically just asked him, hey, you weren't working May 24th and May 25th, correct? Correct. You went back in there and falsified those pool chemical logs after the fact, didn't you? Answer, yes. And by this,
Wow.
he gotten beaten up pretty good. He was ready to come clean. We then went the added step of saying, well, all right, now, how long had you been falsifying those pool logs? A year.
Holy smokes.
When did you stop falsifying those pool chemical logs? When I found out I had to do this deposition. Well, by the time of the deposition, that was December of 2022. So he'd been falsifying those records for 3.5 years.
Mm, mm, mm.
Then the question became, all right, is this just limited to a fellow named Juan Rivera, who was in charge of the pools? Is this a rogue employee? Or is this a problem that runs throughout the corporation? So we deposed his immediate supervisor. Immediate supervisor in his deposition, when asked, do you care how long, or, would you like to know how long Juan had been falsifying the logs? His answer was, nah, I don't really care. So, okay. So then we go depose the department head, who was both of their supervisor. And Kevin, I started asking this department head questions about those pool logs, and he starts pleading the Fifth Amendment. So, of course,
Wow.
I started being like, well, heck, let me just think of as many different questions as I can to get this
Right.
the Fifth Amendment. He ends up invoking this Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination more than 20 times.
Wow.
Later on, we were able to catch the 30B6 witness and some things that just we didn't see how they could add up factually. We got the general manager to admit that the pools were the moneymaker. That's what drew the families in. Without the pools, you didn't have the families. Without the families, you didn't have the money. And what we ultimately learned in that case was that the reason all these people were engaged in the conduct they were, it's not because they were evil. It's because the order from the top, right, was the pools have to stay open. We are not shutting down the pools. And the only time these pools shut down, Kevin, are when DHEC would come out and shut them down. So if you fast forward all the way to 2023, when our expert was out there doing a site inspection, he noticed that one of the pools that was open had stagnant water. He noticed that their pump room, their chemical room where they keep everything, was basically a chlorine bomb waiting to happen. And he was like, guys, I feel like there's a duty for us to let DHEC know that, we got an ongoing danger. So we get back in touch with DHEC again and say, hey, this is what's going on. When DHEC goes out there in 2023, 10 out of their 11 pools were shut down all over again for either illegally high chlorine levels, or in this instance, a lot of the pools didn't even have any chlorine in them at all. It was just humans. So almost 3 years to the date of Ashton getting burnt, they still hadn't changed their behavior. And the thing that stuck out to us was, throughout that entire case, and probably right now, there are plenty of families checking into that resort who have no idea.
All right. Yeah.
And people not having any idea is one of the motivating factors for us to push as hard as we did. And when questions of confidentiality came up, to say not only no, but hell no. People are going to know about this. You burn a child, people are going to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're so grateful for you doing what you did in that case. I mean, that's an example of a case that we would all like to have in our career, where we make not only a difference for our own client, but for others. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, how many other children or people have been burned by these dangerous pools. How's Ashton doing right now?
Yeah, so he just turned 7. He's sweet. He just became a big brother. His mom, Heather, who was our client, just had a little girl.
All right.
And this is probably as good as it's ever going to get for Ashton, because he's 7. He hasn't gone into a locker room yet.
Right.
He hasn't, thought about being intimate with anybody, and had all the fears that go with that. But Kevin, I mean, he's got permanent disfigurement, permanent chemical burns that extend along the right side, just to the right of his penis, throughout his pubic area, and again along his waistband, where even though he's undergone a series of laser scar treatments, there's still some keloid, and it's still there. It's never going away. And one of the things that we said is, look, Ashton's got another 70, 75 years ahead of him. He's never going to forget it. He's going to live with it. $10 million, this company remembers, but in a generation they forget. At 50 or $100 million, the same way Ashton's never going to forget, they're never going to forget either. They should never forget the name Ashton Douglas. They should never forget what they did to him, and it should never happen to another child. And that's going to take 50 or $100 million. And at different points, we thought 50 was the number. At other points, when I golden ruled myself and I thought about them burning my child, my number jumped to over 100, which then begged the question of why would I think Ashton's case was worth any less? So we were going to tell the jury it was a 9-figure case, at least $100 million. I mean, one of the concerns, Kevin, we had was, if we get a verdict that large, how long is it going to be on appeal?
Right.
So we reached out to appellate counsel 6-9 months ago, wanting to get them on board early in the case. And what ultimately happened is there was a final settlement opportunity for all the coverage, which totaled $26 million. And quite literally 1 minute before the deadline, we got an email saying they accepted our offer and tendered the 26.
Wow. Well, congratulations on a job well done. You did a masterful job on that case. And I can just tell from listening to you tell the story that you worked hard to you worked hard to build that case by digging, probing, pushing, and being on it. And that's how you get those kind of results. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I should mention, we worked and worked and worked and worked that case to show that, discovery can be a gold mine. Evidence matters. You take all these persuasive techniques, all this work, you see all these things that you read about, talk about, hear about, and they all work, and they work even better when you go out and you do the damn work
Right,
to
right.
build the case. And what was really fun on this one is as we're working, as we're building, as we're kicking them. I'd associated Nick Rowley and Brian Ward in their firm, and it was great. This $26 million settlement opportunity, is coming from Nick Rowley, who I think is one of, if not the finest trial lawyer in the country right now. And got a wonderful compliment from Nick. Wish we could have tried the case with him.
Yeah, that would
But
have been
got
something to see.
got a wonderful compliment of like, dude, man, y'all are awesome. I mean, this is in the top 10 of any case workup I've ever seen, which was a huge compliment coming from Nick, who's just a wonderful, incredible trial lawyer.
That's great. What an experience. And you made such a difference in that case. So one thing I've noticed about you, because I've been watching you and following you for a while now, is you're so ingrained and invested in your community in Columbia. I was just looking online the other day. I think, what was it, Facebook or something, where I saw that you started a scholarship at the law school there at South Carolina. But I've seen other things, Kenny, over the years that you've done. I think you did was it, I may be misremembering this, but it was like a playground or something that you sponsored, or a baseball field or something. And so you're obviously invested in that, which is terrific. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and why you do it and that sort of thing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking about that. So I guess a couple of reasons. I've been fortunate, and I'll just kind of speak to the law school scholarship first. My dad's a great guy. I mean, he's a hard ass. He was real hard on us, but a great guy.
Was he a lawyer?
Now, all things, he was a dentist. It's a long story. He went to
Okay.
dental school when he was 18,
Yeah.
and then he was done with dental school at 22. Went to Vietnam. By the time he was 25, he had his own practice, couple kids, and had been to a war. I mean,
Wow.
he's a fascinating guy. Um, but he went out of his way, like, not to spoil us. The thing that he was real big on, though, was making sure that school was paid for, so that when we got out, we didn't have to chase a job just because of student debt. And other people obviously don't have that same advantage. So we decided, once we got in a position where we could do more and more for scholarships at the law school, in this instance, creating an endowed scholarship fund to help other students have opportunities that I was afforded, and not have as much financial pressure, as much student debt, that it was important to give back in that way. So that's what we did with an endowed scholarship recently. More generally, we just want to be in the habit of giving, not to wait and wait and wait and wait to give once, but to always be in the habit of giving what we could when we could. And I'd heard about Giving Tuesday, this Tuesday after Thanksgiving, where people said, all right, I've done Black Friday and Cyber Saturday and all these other catchy names, Local Monday
Right.
or something. And now Giving Tuesday. And I was like, well, it shouldn't just be once a year. It should be giving every Tuesday. Every Tuesday, let's give. So we
Right.
started something called Giving Every Tuesday, where every Tuesday we give. It might be a little bit of money. It might be a lot of money to different organizations that we believe in and want to support, to always be in that habit of giving. And one of the things that we decided is we want to strive to be South Carolina's most charitable law firm, giving what we could when we could. And Kevin, I'll tell you, every single time we do it, it always works out for the best. We don't do it simply so that that we can get cases. And I can't think of times where we've made a donation and then the next day we get a call about a big case. That is
Right,
not my
right,
experience. What my experience has been, though, is that people say, man, good guy, trustworthy, giving,
right.
caring, involved. That's the kind of person I'd like to have as my lawyer. And that has made a difference.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So I commend you on that. It's so important that we do that in our communities, and there's a big place for that, especially not only for bigger firms, but for firms who are on the smaller side, like we are, um, where we are truly, family businesses. Yours is the same way, and it's so important to give back, and there's so many opportunities to do it. So good job. And it's funny. The University of South Carolina Law School. When I'm in Columbia, my last name is Mottley. So who do you think of when you're in South Carolina in the legal field? You think of Ron Motley, the legendary trial lawyer. I've gotten stopped so many times down there and asked if I'm a relative or an acquaintance. I guess we are related very distantly, but he went to the University of South Carolina Law School. Is that right?
I'm almost positive he didn't. Kevin, I don't
Oh,
know if you're aware of this. His longtime law partner, Joe Rice.
okay.
I said we strive to be South Carolina's most charitable law firm. I don't think we're going to catch up with Joe Rice at Motley Rice. Joe just gifted the law school $30 million. And
Oh, wow.
it's now the
Wow.
Joseph F. Rice School of Law, which it
Hey,
should be.
I saw that. I think I saw that. And wow, now that's a
But,
contract.
I mean, those are the guys that help chase down asbestos. Those are the guys that help
Right.
chase down tobacco. The law school should be named after.
Right. Well, I've had a few people buy me a drink now and then down there because they they think I have some importance in the legal field in South Carolina. But anyway, you're from a great state, a great town, and you and I are going to connect soon when I'm back in Columbia because it looks like we may have another Gamecock in the Motley family heading to Columbia. And we really like your town, like your state. We vacation there every year. I've been going to Kiowa since 1981. So I kind of
It's
feel,
getting better and better.
yeah, I kind of feel like I'm from there. And I went to Virginia Tech undergrad. Now we got Shane Beamer coaching over there, Frank Beamer's son. So there's so many connections there that we just love it. So, all right, folks. So Kenny,
And Shane couldn't be a nicer guy. I'm actually a big
uh,
Clemson fan, but
oh,
Shane could not be a nicer guy. I wish he's
oh
one of
yeah,
those guys I truly wish that they beat every team on their schedule other than Clemson.
right, right.
Because, Frank couldn't be classier and Shane couldn't be any kinder. And
That's
I love
right.
that there's that connection back to Virginia Tech too.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's it's kind of turned into a UVA and Tech thing for me with South Carolina and Clemson. I'll usually be pulling for Clemson when they're not playing South Carolina. I went to UVA Law School, so I'm usually pulling for UVA when they're not playing Virginia Tech. So it's kind of gotten that same vibe for me.
Yep.
But I think good things are ahead for the Gamecocks, and we'll be down there, I'm sure, several times this fall. But
Come on down, man.
yeah, so Kenny, tell us if folks want to get in touch with you and pick your brain on a brain injury or any other catastrophic injury case, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the easiest way, my email's on our website, Berger spelled with an E. If you just Google Kenneth Berger, or it's Berger Law SC. And then my cell phone number is 803-360-6267. Call me, shoot me a text. Feel free to shoot me an email. The email is kberger@bergerlawsc.com. And Kevin, yeah, we do a good number of brain injury cases. South Carolina, at least for right now, has pretty favorable dram shop laws. And so what we found is we were doing brain injury cases. And a lot of the brain injury cases were coming from truck wrecks and drunk driving wrecks and boats.
Right,
And
right.
because of that, we've done a number of truck wreck cases, drunk driving cases. You know how it goes. I mean, it's basically if you combine people, heavy machinery, and throw in some alcohol. Sadly, we've done a lot of wrongful death cases on the truck wreck and drunk driving side and drunk boating side.
Right.
But again, small number of cases where where what we talk about a lot is, we want to work to make a good case a great case. And these folks with brain damage deserve full justice just like anybody else. And that is, and I know, it just requires a heck of a lot of work and a lawyer who gives a damn.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming on. And it's been a real delight. We've learned a lot. So thanks a lot.
It's been great. Thank you for having me.